CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. China's economy teeters on the brink of deflation, leading to speculation the central bank will have to reduce interest rates again.
Our other headlines, tea for two. US President Joe Biden visits London on his way to a crucial NATO summit, with the alliance divided on some big questions.
The Kremlin says Russian President Vladimir Putin has met the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin.
And an investigation suggests that the Greek Coast Guard may have caused a migrant boat to sink, leaving 500 passengers missing. China's economy teetered on the brink of deflation last month, leading to speculation that the central bank will have to reduce interest rates again.
So let me run you through some of the numbers. Factory gate prices fell at the fastest pace in 7 years. They're 5.4% lower than a year ago, and that's a figure not seen since December 2015. And it's because demand for consumer and manufactured products softened. Consumer prices fell 0.2% compared with the previous month, missing analysts' expectations of a 0.2% rise. Well, Shannon Shen is head of international at Crane Shares, and we're going to dig into all of this. So good to see you. So what does this weaker than expected data say about China's economy?
Nice to see you. Thank you for having me on your program. It's clearly reflective of the weaker demand in China, but at the same time, it's also a reflective of results of the falling commodity price as one, and some food price get dropped. That's holistically a result causing both the headline number today announced that are showing weakness, but at the same time, it also offers more room, particularly the inflation number are very low. It offers more room for central bank, for policymakers in China to provide more liquidity and more support to the economy. I think this is leave them more room, if not a wake-up call for them to realize economic on itself, domestic economy on itself, coupled with global uncertainty and also weaker demand outside of China, is not going to be sufficient for Chinese economy to rebound or to achieve the desired growth target for the policymakers set out in China.
You talked about demand outside of China, but domestic demand is yet to fully recover. Why do you think households are still so reluctant to spend?
Probably two key reasons, I'd say. Number one, real estate is still the highest portion of financial assets in Chinese household. Probably around 65% of Chinese household assets, financial assets, is in real estate. That number has come down over the years, is now being diversified to invest in equity and fixed income. Still is a high proportion. When real estate market are still consolidating, finding its bottom, become a bit stabilizing, household would be a little bit reluctant until they have a bit of more clarity on their wealth effect overall to decide their spendings. I'm less worried for a very simple reason. Chinese households typically improved, showed in the record of a PBOC's number, was last year they managed to save $2.6 trillion. The household has the money, has the liquidity, they do have the power to spend, and real estate market got to show a bit of a stabilizing sign. Yeah. Second, finding them a job. When you have more income to come, your flows, your money the income come to the household is very stable, and you have more to expect, you will feel more comfortable to spend, and you have the power to spend.
So you've said that we can expect some more support from the central bank. But look, if we are looking at deflation, what's that going to mean for the global economy?
This is actually, relatively speaking, would be a slightly, I put it another way, relatively easier to fix the job for the Chinese policymaker than their counterparts in a global sense. I know I live in London, a lot of people live in US. We are facing heightened inflation number. That job is harder to deal. Raising interest rates is questionable toolkit to do. But deflation here is because the demand is to make people more comfortable, is inject certain things to boost up investors' confidence. What can you do? Number one, stabilizing the real estate market, which they have been doing. I think they should do more, allowing local province cities to do the measure that right for that city to stabilizing real estate market. That's number one. Number two, is coming to summertime. It's going to be a bit of a traveling, summer vacations. I think the seasonalities might actually provide to be a bit positive for the household to spend, to travel, to visiting their friends they haven't been able to see over the last few years. That's the second. And third is the fresh graduates from university going to hit the job market very soon. The policymaker in China will have to do a lot of things to help the corporates, big or small, state-owned or private, to create job opportunity for these fresh graduates. Millions of them are going to hit the market. So I think in overall, corporate policy, liquidity, physical spending has to all be announced now to help the economy. I stay high hope of July political bureau meeting to see what that.
Sharon Shone from Crane Shares, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that's the perspective on China. In the United States this week, investors are waiting for key inflation data along with the start of the second quarter earnings season. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, watching events for us in New York. Big week coming up then?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, very big week. Thanks for asking, Juliet and Jamie. It really is. And I'll tell you, we're all building up to about 2 weeks from now, 25th, 26th of July, it'll be a Tuesday and a Wednesday. It's still about 2 weeks away, as I say, when the Federal Reserve will make its next decision on interest rates. And many people here think it could go either way. I mean, the smart money is on a 25 basis point hike, but equally, if the data comes in and the data deserves a pause, like we had in June, then I guess there will be a pause. So let's have a look and see what happened last week, because last week was a bit confusing. We had three key jobs reports last week. First of all, the ADP private jobs report told us that 497,000 new jobs have been created in the month of June. And then we had the government jobs report for the same period, and it was 209,000, and we'd been told to expect 240,000. So people are going, hang on a minute, this can't be right. Something's not right here at all. How come we missed it? It's the first time the economists have missed on the downside in 15 months. Where did the ADP get their figures from? Anyway, we'll leave that to one side. We also had the JOLTS report, which I didn't report on this program to you. The JOLTS report is the number of openings in America, and we're down now from about 11 million to 10 million. But normally it's about 6 or 7 million. So what are people doing? I mean, are they sitting in Starbucks all day? I have absolutely no idea, and nor does anybody here either. One thing we do know from that report, 4 million people quit their jobs in the month in question. They just that's it, see ya, we're out of here, wouldn't want to be here. And they left their jobs. But that 4 million is less than it has been in the previous months of the year 2023. So I think, in summary, the labour market is moderating. Okay. Now, this week we get CPI, which is consumer price inflation, on Wednesday. We're looking for it to be at 3.1%, down from 4% last time round. Used cars, apparently, the price of those has dropped off a cliff. That's one reason that they will be much lower when the number comes out. And then we get lots of Fed speak, members of the FOMC committee chatting away before they have to go into PERDA, so we'll hear from them. And then second quarter earnings begin on Thursday with Delta and Pepsi and the big banks on Friday. So the markets are all a bit jittery this morning ahead of the inflation data on Wednesday. The Dow is currently up 82 points, but the S&P 500 is down by about 8 points. And I think when it comes to earnings at the end of the week, we're all looking now for slightly softer reports from these companies that we have been used to. And that's the reason that the S&P is down today. Guys?
Now, we talked about this story last week. Threads is roaring and roaring ahead, isn't it?
I know. I mean, it's all getting a bit silly, really. Don't you think so? I mean, over at Threads, what are they talking about? They're talking about gardening and baking. Whereas over at Twitter, we're talking about the real things that matter in the world, like the identity of people and stuff like that, and other key stories that we all want to know the answers to. I mean, the thing is, analysts tell us that Threads now has 100 million sign-ups, okay, and that's in 5 days. So on the face of it, that's really good for them. But you've got to remember, it's linked to Instagram, and Instagram has 2.35 billion monthly active users. So the thing is, I don't understand how this works, really. But the point is, because it's linked to Instagram, you know, it's kind of easy to suck people into it, to draw them in. And then it's very difficult for them to go away from Threads if they wish to, you see. And that's one of the advantages of starting a social media company when you have the backing of the others that Zuckerberg has, like Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram. And this is why the other social media companies like Mastodon and Blue Sky haven't made anything like the growth that Threads has, because it's backed by Insta. Now, of course, it's not available in Europe. It goes against the rules there, or at least officially. We all know there are ways around it. Don't you worry about that. But the thing is, it still only has a quarter of Twitter's 400 million active users. So it's got a long way to go. And there's no guarantee people are going to be happy talking about baking and flower arranging forever, you see. We have to test it out yet. In the meantime, the cage fight, Jamie, you'll be glad to hear, is still on, apparently. And then yesterday, Elon Musk tweeted about a new contest between him and Mark Zuckerberg, where they basically would have a body measuring contest. They sort of shape, you know, they sort of look at each other in the buff, you know, and compare, if you know what I mean. So no one knows whether that's going to go ahead either. In the meantime, the Meta platform shares are rising this morning, just under 1%.
John, I think that's a good moment to draw a line under your interview this morning. Thank you so much. Good to see you. We'll see you again tomorrow. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
President Joe Biden has told the British Prime Minister that relations between the US and the UK are rock solid. He's in the UK for a flying visit en route to a NATO summit in Lithuania. It comes amid tension among Western allies over the US decision to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. Biden also met King Charles in Windsor. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, who's in London. Stuart, a brief visit then by Joe Biden. Was this a gesture, or was there more to it?
It was meant to tick two boxes. One was ceremonial, yes, to show that the UK and US relationship is as strong as it ever has been, especially with some Conservative politicians and the Conservative media here getting cold feet about Joe Biden, concerned that he's anti-Britain. But this went off without a hitch, really. The Prime Minister and the US President managed to talk about their Atlantic Declaration, a new agreement to share and cooperate on artificial intelligence, lowering trade barriers and security and defence cooperation, while also managing to make plans for the upcoming NATO summit, which both leaders largely agree upon when it comes to admitting Ukraine into NATO, how that might happen, and also getting Sweden into NATO. Then a visit to Windsor Castle with King Charles III, where Joe Biden talked about climate change and what can be done to help that when it comes to financing and money. So all of that managing to show both leaders to their own domestic audiences that they're big on the global stage, that they have the support of each other, and also then managing largely to avoid any conflict, apart from perhaps on cluster munitions, although Downing Street says that while the UK Prime Minister did bring it up, he didn't press the issue. It seems like that won't be a big deal for Joe Biden in NATO. Certainly the UK not putting up any public opposition to that potential delivery to Ukraine.
Stuart, thank you very much. That's our correspondent, Stuart Smith, in London.
Alibaba's Hong Kong-listed shares rose 3% on Monday amid hopes that the years-long scrutiny of its financial arm, Ant Group, is coming to an end. Chinese regulators fined the group more than $980 million for violating consumer protection and corporate governance laws. The regulators said most of the outstanding problems have now been resolved and that the domestic tech industry will now see normalised supervision. The budget airline EasyJet has cancelled 1,700 flights just as the summer travel season gets underway. Flights have been axed to and from England's Gatwick Airport, with constrained airspace over Europe and air traffic control difficulties being blamed. EasyJet says 95% of affected passengers have been rebooked onto alternative flights. The company that manages most of London's water services has secured $960 million of emergency funding from shareholders. Thames Water has been on the brink of collapse due to high levels of debt, poor infrastructure and fines over sewage leaks. The latest funds come on top of around $640 million it received from investors in March. The company says it's likely to need many more cash injections. New tariffs introduced as a result of Brexit threaten the future of a major British car plant. That's according to the director of Vauxhall's huge factory outside London. From next year, car makers must ensure 45% of components of electric cars originate in the UK or the EU, or face a 10% tariff. Vauxhall is warning its competitiveness is at risk as it exports 70% of its cars to mainland Europe. US Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has called on regulators to investigate Prime Energy drinks, claiming that the product is aimed at children despite its high caffeine content. Prime Energy contains 200 milligrams of caffeine per can. That's around twice the amount in rival energy drink Red Bull, despite carrying a warning that it's not recommended for anyone under the age of 18. Schumer claims it's packaged and marketed as a caffeine-free drink, causing parents to buy it unwittingly for their children.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Turkey's President Erdogan raises the stakes for Sweden's bid for NATO membership. We're in Vilnius ahead of a crucial summit.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. So as we've been hearing earlier in the programme, President Biden heading to Lithuania for that NATO summit. Away from the row over the supply of cluster bombs, the alliance wants to agree on more concrete assurances for Ukraine, including a possible pathway to membership after this conflict. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Beaver, in the capital, Vilnius. John, what kind of assurances is NATO hoping to give Ukraine?
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it, for NATO and their membership, because they actually have some quite different opinions about it. So I would expect that we are going to be hearing a lot of the same messages that we've heard over the last few weeks and months, and that is that NATO stands united behind Ukraine, and the support of Ukraine will continue whilst the fight with Russia continues. And whilst all of that is true and the training of Ukrainian troops continues by NATO countries, that pathway for Ukraine to join NATO is very difficult. Of course, Ukraine currently involved in an active conflict, so that rules them out of immediate NATO membership, say a lot of people. Countries such as Germany and the United States are anxious, say there are still certain things that NATO has to go through before, Ukraine has to go through, before it can become a NATO member. They are very anxious and very aware of not wanting to antagonise Russia Russia any further. And then we have other countries such as the UK who are keener on a more streamlined process to get Ukraine into NATO as soon as any fighting finishes with Russia. But it is going to be a major sticking point. I would imagine that we are going to be hearing some sort of deal in terms of there being an improved pathway for membership, but certainly nobody expecting any firm answers over the next few days here.
Well, NATO's boss thinking that it's still possible for Sweden to get the nod for membership at this summit. How's that going to happen?
Well, that is very tricky as well, because Sweden, the main opponent there is Turkey, who have been saying that they are not willing to let Sweden in. They accuse Sweden of harbouring dissidents that some people, themselves included, consider to be terrorists. Say Sweden aren't doing enough to expel those people, say they are protecting those people. That has been a major sticking point. Now we have a real spanner in the works that has been thrown in by the Turkish president, where he is now linking allowing Sweden into NATO. He's saying that will only happen if discussions can restart about getting Turkey into the EU, a completely separate organisation. But he gave a press conference earlier today. We can have a listen to what he had to say.
I call on those countries that have kept Turkey waiting at the gates of the European Union for more than 50 years, and I will make this call in Vilnius. Open the way for Turkey's membership of the European Union. When you pave the way for Turkey, we'll pave the way for Sweden, as we did for Finland.
So what we have heard there is very much at odds with what we've been hearing previously in terms of Sweden having to fulfil certain criteria, and that would allow them membership. Now we have this whole other can of worms being discussed. We have already had the German Chancellor saying the two things just aren't linked, that one cannot go hand in hand with the other, that they are separate organisations. We've also heard from the EU, who say there's a very clear path to membership, and again these two organisations aren't linked. Of course, many of the countries in the EU are also in NATO, but it is just yet another complex issue that's going to be needed to be discussed here in the coming days.
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent John Beaver in Vilnius. Let me now show you the pictures that are live from Lithuania, and President Joe Biden has just arrived aboard Air Force One. You can see there, just touched down in Vilnius. The door is open, and we are waiting for President Biden to leave Air Force One. The usual preparations underway. The Beast, that enormous vehicle that accompanies the President of the United States to every country in the world, is no doubt being readied to collect President Biden as he takes his steps off the plane. And there you have the welcoming committee getting ready to welcome President Joe Biden as he arrives in Vilnius in Lithuania for the start of this NATO summit. Obviously not quite ready to leave the aircraft after the relatively short flight. We saw him a little earlier in the United Kingdom, where he dropped in very briefly to London, and he met Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the UK, and King Charles at Windsor Castle. A very brief visit to the United Kingdom. The real business of this visit to Europe for the President of the United States is, of course, this NATO summit with a pretty packed agenda, as we were hearing. The row over the supply of cluster bombs, and the alliance wanting to agree on more concrete assurances for Ukraine, including, as we were hearing, that possible pathway to NATO membership after this conflict. Well, President Biden and his entourage obviously readying themselves to leave Air Force One, and we may return to those live pictures from Vilnius in Lithuania a little later in the programme.
Ahead of that NATO summit, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky asked NATO members for clear security guarantees. And our correspondent Stephanie Freed is in the Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv. Stephanie, what does Zelensky want to get out of the NATO meeting?
Well, certainly membership, an offer of membership would be something that he would ideally want. But as we are hearing now from Lithuania, that doesn't seem like it will necessarily be likely or be likely at all. So one other point that's being made over and over again is security guarantees. And then security guarantees, the understanding is that NATO is looking at modeling some sort of package for Ukraine that would be modeled after the U.S. administration's security guarantees package with Israel. And what is that? The deal with Israel and the U.S. administration is that Israel maintains a qualitative edge in the region security-wise, and that comes in the form of weapons, money, information and intelligence sharing, joint training, military training. Again, that gives Israel that edge, and it's a multiple-year open pipeline. So the understanding is that's what President Zelensky is also looking for in terms of the security guarantees that we're hearing about. And from what I'm also hearing from others who are weighing in, NATO's also looking at that model. So obviously we'll know more in the coming days, but that's basically the bulk of it. That's the general idea, is to give Ukraine an advantage, more weapons, an advantage in this crisis.
Stephanie, I also wanted to ask you about where we are with the conflict. Ukraine saying that its forces are making progress on the front line.
That's right. And President Zelensky himself has said that Ukraine has taken back hundreds of kilometers of territory that Russia had taken. But according to intelligence reports, analysis, they're not seeing the same thing. They are seeing that, yes, there is fighting. Yes, there are hits and rockets and mortars and missiles being launched into various areas. 4 people killed in Zaporizhia today, from what Ukraine says was a launch of a projectile of artillery launch there as well. Russian military officials saying that Ukraine is flying drones around the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and those same officials saying that if necessary they will take action. But again, aside from the fact that we do know that there is heavy fighting in the Bakhmut areas, the Zaporizhia areas, around this area certainly as well in the south, no real concrete information that we're getting of Ukraine advances.
Stephanie Freed, thank you very much. While Stephanie's been speaking, you could see those live pictures there of President Biden arriving. We saw him leave Air Force One, step down the red carpet and get into the Beast, his transport of choice, and of course the big welcoming committee there, the Guard of Honour for him. That's President Biden ahead of the NATO meeting.
Spanish rescuers say they found what could be a migrant boat that went missing 2 weeks ago with around 200 passengers on board. It was travelling from Senegal to Spain's Canary Islands. Well, let's speak now to our correspondent Ken Brown, watching events for us in Madrid. Ken, so news that one of these boats, we think, has been found.
Yes, Jimmy, breaking news on a developing story here, as the Spanish Coast Guard has just recently tweeted that they have rescued 86 people from a boat south of the Canary Islands. They say 80 men and 6 women, all of sub-Saharan origin, have now been rescued and are on their way to the Canary Islands. The Coast Guard spotter plane, the Sasimar 101, saw or had a sight of a boat earlier today, some 4 or 5 hours ago. They estimated that there were around 200 people on board. That has proved to be a little bit off. 86 people rescued. Now, that has raised some questions, because earlier we thought that this was a boat that had left the Senegalese coast on the 27th of June with 200 people on board. But at that same moment, around the same time, 3 vessels with 300 people departed from the Senegalese fishing town of Kafountine. Now, it looks like the boat that has been found today, 86 people rescued, that this is one of those boats.
Well, hopefully more clarity on this in the coming hours. Let's talk about the crossing in general from West Africa to the Canary Islands. I mean, it is one of the most dangerous migrant crossings in the world, and yet the numbers attempting to cross still remain high despite all of these deaths.
Yes, the charities like Walking Borders have estimated that around 1,000 people have died trying to get from Africa to Spain this year alone. When you look along that coast, you're looking at countries like Morocco, Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, Mauritania, the Gambia. Many people are fleeing some desperate situations, conflicts, economic troubles, and they are trying to get to Europe at any cost, including risking their lives. Now, we've been speaking to the Red Cross. We're actually right here outside the Red Cross headquarters in Madrid. Earlier, we talked to the Canary Islands Red Cross. We talked to them about what kind of solutions can there be for this situation moving forward. Here's what they said.
It's definitely something for the politicians to discuss. The key decision makers should sit down and work out how to regulate this. It's clear from our perspective that there are still too many lives being lost at sea with the way the current situation is. And we hope at some point these losses will bring about change.
Yes, this summer marks the busiest time for these crossings. It goes on until November later this year. Of course, many people don't make it. Last year alone, 559 people, including 22 children, lost their lives in this crossing. It's something that needs to be looked at. The charities are calling for politicians to create safer ways for people to try to apply for asylum and refugee status. But today, at least, we have some good news to bring you. 86 people rescued off the coast of Spain.
Ken, thank you for that. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Madrid.
A new investigation has found that attempts by the Greek Coast Guard to tow a fishing trawler at the centre of one of Europe's worst migrant disasters may have caused it to sink. The Coast Guard has always denied it attempted to tow the boat. Around 500 people are still missing after the vessel sank off Greece last month. There were just 104 survivors. Let's talk to our correspondent, Evangelo Tsitsos. He's in Athens. Evangelo, this investigation rather contradicts the Greek Coast Guard's version of events. What else did they find?
Yes, indeed. I mean, the heat here in Greece is rising, the temperature is rising, but also the heat on the Hellenic Coast Guard after that investigation from independent journalists from this group called Solomon. They've been doing a lot of investigation into the matter, and what they found is that the Hellenic Coast Guard did have a ship nearby during the incident, nearby the port in Heathrow, very close to the incident off the coast of Pylos, but did not respond. They had, in the report specifically, they say that Frontex advised them twice to head out and conduct a rescue operation and a search operation, but apparently it fell on deaf ears. That's what the report is saying. It also saying here that a lot of the what the Coast Guard has been saying, there's a lot of contradictions as to what time the incident took place, how many Hellenic Coast Guard boats were out there at the time, if they responded quick, and whether they acted fast enough. They're in this investigation as well. There is a report about the rope, the so-called rope that apparently the Hellenic Coast Guard in the beginning said they did not throw, but now in this investigation they saw that they did throw, but then it did break, and then they didn't try a second time. We did speak to one of those journalists who conducted that investigative report, and this is what he had to say.
Important testimony we have in this investigation comes from some survivors who come from Pakistan, who were in the lower part, so they couldn't have visual, some visual, testimony. But they described that while the engine of the boat was not working, they felt a push forward, and how they described it's like a rocket. So basically, the vessel, the fishing boat, its engine is not working, and suddenly it pushes forward like a rocket. This, in our understanding, it fits to the description of a towing attempt.
Evangelo, what are the relatives saying, and where does this leave any official investigation?
Well, just to mention here that this investigation from these independent journalists will continue. Now, on the side of the relatives, there's been reports after this investigative report came out. Clearly, I've been saying this from the beginning of the incident took place, that the Hellenic Coast Guard left them there to die and didn't help them. And frankly, they were pushing them more towards the Italian water so they can alleviate their responsibility off them to have to rescue so many people. Of course, they're very angry, but at the same time, they're in a way relieved that we knew what happened, and this investigation continues, as it's not just left in some drawer down in some bureaucratic office here in Greece. Now the official investigation is ongoing. There's a lot of pressure from international reporters, from journalists, but also from the European Union, who Brussels has actually been quite vocal against what happened, and they want this investigation to continue through. And of course, the Hellenic government has to go through it. But the question here is the investigation from the Hellenic government transparent? And if so, how come when this was happening, there were no reports from those cameras, the cameras that the Hellenic Coast Guard had on them, which were funded by Frontex? Now, this will continue. The investigation is going to go through, and we're going to be seeing more of this in the next few days.
Evangelo Sipsas, thank you very much.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the United Nations warns Sudan is on the brink of a full-scale civil war after an airstrike kills dozens of people.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Juliet Mann. Our top stories. China's economy teetered on the brink of deflation last month, leading to speculation that the central bank will have to reduce interest rates again. Our other headlines, US President Joe Biden has arrived in Lithuania's capital ahead of a major NATO summit, with the military alliance divided on some big questions.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin has met the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. The Kremlin says the meeting took place on the 29th of June, days after the rebellion of the Wagner group. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow. Dasha, what more do we know about that meeting?
Well, we do know from the Kremlin that the Russian president has met with Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner mercenary group, as well as with the unit commanders. The total of 35 people have been invited to the Kremlin on the 29th of June, just 5 days after the aborted March of Justice towards the Russian capital. Now, as we understand, the Russian president has given his assessment of what happened on the 23rd and the 24th of June, and the Wagner fighters had an opportunity to give their vision of those events. We also know from the Kremlin that the Russian president has made some employment suggestions and offers to those fighters, and they have in return pledged their support to the Russian president, saying that they were the soldiers of Russia who were willing to continue to fight for their motherland. But also, of course, this is taking place after Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, said that Yevgeny Prigozhin was no longer in Belarus, where he was confirmed to be on the 27th of June.
Dasha, Russia's top general, Gerasimov, he's made his first public appearance after the Wagner rebellion. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, that's right. Valery Gerasimov, the Chief of General Staff of Russian Federation, has been one of those who has been criticized by Yevgeny Prigozhin when he, in fact, for months before he started his rebellion. And in that rebellion itself, he was demanding the staffing changes within the Russian Ministry of Defense. Now, today we have seen the footage released by Russia's MOD showing Gerasimov in a meeting at one of the command posts. He was talking to his subordinates and was listening to the reports about how the Russian air defenses have intercepted 4 ballistic missiles that have been headed towards Russia against the Crimea, Rostov and Kaluga region. So he was giving orders how to beef up Russian air defense systems and how to better find the locations where the missiles that Ukraine uses then to strike Russia have been located. So certainly that was his first public appearance since the 24th of June, but now the questions are still there. Whether it is General Surovikin, who has been on the contrary spoken highly about by Yevgeny Prigozhin himself.
Dasha Chernyshova, thank you very much.
The United Nations has warned that Sudan is on the brink of a full-scale civil war. This comes after an army airstrike killed dozens of people in the city of Omdurman at the weekend. Sudan has extended the closure of its airspace until the end of July. The country's army and paramilitary forces have been battling for control of the capital since April. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Naba Moeddin, in the city of Madani. Naba, what's the latest situation on the ground?
Actually, Jamie, after the airstrike, traded attacks between the two sides, but unfortunately there were real victims. 22 people were killed. Despite that, till now there is no side carrying out or taking the responsibility of the attack. So after the traded attacks between the two sides, there is escalation on the ground. Omdurman city is witnessing fierce clashes between the Sudanese military and their rival, the Rapid Support Forces. Maybe, Jamie, because it's an important city for the RSF. They are bringing their reinforcements and their supply from Darfur, which is their social base and their soldiers' base, to Khartoum through Omdurman. So right now, while I'm speaking to you, there is fierce clashes in Omdurman, and people there are suffering a dire humanitarian situation because of the escalation on the ground after the deadly weekend.
And what about the diplomatic effort to intervene and try to stop the fighting?
Actually, Jamie, there is no sign that the two sides will accept any of the initiatives. There is an initiative by the IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, now in Addis Ababa, and Sudan has already sent the delegation to Addis Ababa, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs just stated that they are rejecting Kenya to be head of the IGAD, so they are objecting this, and we are expecting that they will boycott any initiative or peace talks regarding the IGAD initiative. But there is also some diplomatic efforts made by the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and we are expecting a diplomatic summit between the two warring factions during this week. So if the Egyptian initiative make a breakthrough, maybe we will see the two warring factions sit on negotiation tables again and reach a political resolution very soon.
Naba, thank you for that. Our correspondent Naba Moeddin in the city of Madani.
China is reeling from a stabbing at a kindergarten and the aftermath of a deadly landslide. Our correspondent Li Shanhua has been following the stories. Shanhua, should we start with the kindergarten?
Yeah, absolutely, Juliet and Jamie. Sad news, and the attack took place in Lianjiang County in South China's Guangdong province today. Now let's run you some eyewitness footage which shows police and ambulances at the scene. As you can see, and the whole area has been cordoned off, and you can also see that some people have been knocked over there. And according to the local media, 6 people have been killed, including 3 children, 2 parents, and the teacher. The perpetrator, surnamed Wu, 25 years old, has been arrested, and the investigation is still underway. Motive is unknown at this point. And Julie and Jamie, this has prompted absolutely some concern on Chinese social media over the safety of preschools.
The images are very upsetting, aren't they? And more powerful images coming out of China today. And this landslide, what more do we know? What can you tell us?
Yeah, that is in central China. The rescue team is searching for 7 people who are still missing in central China's Hubei province. And this came after a landslide hit a highway construction site 2 days ago. As we can see, that the rescue team has been looking for some potential survivors. As far as we know now, 1 person has been killed, and this is the latest in a series of deadly landslides caused by torrential rain. And we know the rainy season in China starts around June, and it stays all the way to early August, and authorities have been cautioning people to stay indoors.
And they're also cautioning to stay indoors, not just because of the rain, but because it's really, really hot.
Yeah, that's true. It is very, very hot in China. As for to say, it's a scorching hot summer for China, and in South China, temperatures stay above 35 degrees. In northern China, over 40 degrees, which is just unusual. And as we can see that, let's run you some pictures, we can see that people are doing whatever they can to shield themselves from the high temperature. Especially we can see that in the Chinese capital, Beijing, it's really hot, and those fans are getting really popular right now. And the face covering, also quite popular now in China. Especially you can see a lot of those on Chinese social media, but still drink a lot of water.
We will. Thank you, Li Shanhua.
Well, let's stay with the weather, because heavy rain has caused extreme flooding in New York State, killing at least 1 person. A woman in her 30s was swept away while trying to leave her home in the Hudson Valley. Floods and mudslides forced roads to close and cut power to thousands of people, prompting a state of emergency to be declared in several counties. Officials say the storm has already caused tens of millions of dollars in damage.
1 person has died and 4 missing after landslides in Japan. Authorities have urged tens of thousands of people to leave their homes in affected areas amid continuous torrential rain. The director at Japan's meteorological agency has described the intensity of the rainfall as unlike anything seen before.
The Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, the Netherlands' longest-serving premier, said he will leave politics after a general election sparked by his government's resignation. Rutte's 4-party ruling coalition resigned on Friday after failing to agree on measures to rein in migration. The Prime Minister announced his decision at a parliamentary debate to discuss the fall of the latest governing coalition.
A weight loss drug is being investigated by the European Medicines Agency. It comes after Icelandic authorities flagged potential dangers of Saxenda, made by Novo Nordisk. It highlighted 3 cases of patients taking the medication thinking about suicide or self-harm.
Israel's parliament is set to vote on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's rewritten judicial overhaul later. The move has sparked unprecedented protests over its plans to limit some Supreme Court powers. Critics argue the bill invites corruption and abuses of power.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a basketball craze is taking Chinese villagers by storm. We find out why it's more than a game.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew. And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Well, as the world moved online during the COVID pandemic, there was not surprisingly perhaps a parallel rise in digital and cyber crime.
In Singapore, almost half of all reported crimes now take place online. Our correspondent Miro Liu reports.
The number of scams in Singapore has increased 5 times since 2018. In the 2 years after the pandemic, the total amount lost to scams reached close to $1 billion.
More and more businesses are actually digitalizing or adopting digital technologies in their services, especially during the COVID period where they are forced to go online. Thus, actually, if you look at it, with more services provided now online, the threat surface become larger. There's more opportunities for the scammers to attack their victims. Lastly, it's much easier now for anyone to create a website, to create an application. Similarly for scammers and cyber criminals as well.
Phishing, job, e-commerce, investment and fake friend calls were the top 5 scam types of 2022.
Cyber criminals are very, very smart, very, very well organized. They're designing the campaigns around these emotional triggers. So the emotional trigger could be something like, I want to get a great offer that nobody else can get.
As for businesses in Singapore, ransomware attacks continue to threaten their bottom lines, with 1 case being reported every 3 days. The situation is similarly dire for the rest of Asia. The region faced the highest concentration of cyber attacks in the world for the 2nd year running.
This is, in my opinion, due to a lack of general cybersecurity awareness and education in the region, which is driven from the lack of government policies around data privacy and cybersecurity regulation. Singapore and Japan are the 2 countries that we see leading in implementing these policies.
Singapore takes the digital scams problem very seriously. In fact, it is one of the few Asian countries that has a dedicated government agency for cybersecurity. Most recently, its parliament passed a bill that allows the authorities to take preemptive measures against malicious online behavior, which means the government can now ask the platforms to block websites, remove content, and delete apps on app stores.
But ultimately, it is the general public that needs to take charge of their digital security.
When an offer comes to you that seems too good to be true, very often it is. So I think for us, we have to have that healthy level of suspicion.
Government data shows, contrary to popular belief that scammers only target the elderly, young adults aged between 20 to 39 made up more than half of the total victims. Digital native or not, anyone can be scammed, and everyone needs to stay vigilant in today's world. Mirulu, CGTN, Singapore.
Well, despite that sweltering heat of summer that we were reporting on a little earlier, sport is taking Chinese villages by storm.
Our reporter Li Jianming visited a village in China's Zhejiang province to see how basketball is firing up passions.
You may be familiar with the NBA. But have you ever heard of CGTN? That's the name of the basketball craze currently taking Chinese villages by storm. The skills may not be at the level of LeBron James or Yao Ming, but the locally organized games have sparked nationwide excitement since the spring, attracting billions of views on Chinese social media.
I'm now in China's coastal Zhejiang province. It has some of the country's wealthiest villages. Later on, the final of their basketball tournament will be held here.
Our city has good popular foundations for basketball. The whole city has some 3,000 basketball courts. The government's job is to regulate, support and provide services to the tournament.
The city of Zhuji is known for its basketball. In a city of just 1.2 million people, over 4,000 players have been registered in this tournament. This tradition is passed on from one generation to the next. Before the match, veterans are invited to inspire the young players and become enshrined in the Hall of Fame. Their average age is over 80 years old, with some taking part in basketball games organized for farmers in the province as far back as the early 1960s.
The last time I played basketball was in 1966. We won the Farmers Basketball League Championship in Zhejiang Province. I was a point guard for my team.
One feature for CGTN in the more developed villages on the outskirts of Zhuji is that most of the villagers are not actually farmers. Some work in the pearl processing industry, and many own their own business manufacturing socks, including the MVP. Making socks and processing pearls are the important sources of income for local industry.
Some 70% of socks made in China are from here, Zhuji, and this is a fact that local people take pride in. It is also reflected in the award given during this tournament. If you take a closer look at this bouquet, you will see that each and every flower is made of socks.
The relative riches of Zhuji offer a glimpse into the future possibilities of rural China. As villagers face less pressure to make a living, they have more time to make a life. One hoop at a time. Li Jiaming, CGTN, Zhejiang.
And finally, an adventurous new surfer has been hanging out at a beach in San Diego. A baby seal has taken up the sport, effortlessly mounting surfboards and riding those waves.
Locals have nicknamed the young pup Sammy and say he actively imitates humans to manipulate the surfboard. Experts at SeaWorld say despite his rather unusual behaviour, Sammy appears to be a healthy, playful seal, posing no danger.
The headlines again. China's economy teeters on the brink of deflation, leading to speculation that the central bank will have to reduce interest rates again.
US President Joe Biden has arrived in Lithuania's capital ahead of a major NATO summit, with the alliance divided on some big questions.
And an investigation suggests that the Greek Coast Guard may have caused a migrant boat to sink, leaving 500 passengers missing.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan that QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.